I worked on a version. That was the second version that is not on the shelves today. That was so out there. I mean, it was like like ridiculous. Like it got existential, right? It was like it got it got to a point like, what is a game even, right? It 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 got really ridiculous.
Welcome to Cardboard Creations, where we discuss the process, techniques, and inspiration for designing board games. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Eric Lang to find out how Ankh, Gods of Egypt, was created. But first, let's jump into a brief overview of how Ankh plays. Ankh Gods of Egypt is a competitive game for 2 to 5 players set in ancient mythical Egypt during the transition from polytheism to monotheism. Each player controls an ancient Egyptian god, and their goal is to gather enough devotion to become the only god of Egypt. Devotion is gained by having monuments in your honor and engaging in conflicts with the other gods for dominion over the kingdom. Throughout the game, players take turns moving and summoning figures on the game board, gathering followers and sacrificing them to build monuments or increase their god's Ankh powers. As time advances, monuments may become associated with different gods, mythical guardians will join the conflict, regions of Egypt will be redivided by camel caravans, and 2 gods may even merge into a new divine being. But only one, or perhaps none, will rise in the end as the only god of Egypt. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Candice. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Me too. Yeah, I think it was back in April 2020, like right when we hit that pandemic lockdown period where you demoed Ankh for the BGG team. And
That's right.
you remember that?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I do.
I got to play it for the first time, and at the time I had never played Blood Rage or Rising Sun, and I walked away from that demo and I was just buzzing with excitement. So it became an instant back for me on Kickstarter, and I actually just got my copy.
Oh, that's awesome. So you got yours before me because I still don't have mine.
Oh, what a crime. Well.
Yeah, it's all good. It's not like I don't have millions of prototypes of every version of it.
Oh, you're going to be really excited, I think, when you see the finished product. It's a gorgeous game. So I'm very curious to know, like, what initially inspired you to create Ankh?
This one's a doozy, right? I mean, I'm going to assume that not everybody watching this knows everything about the history of the Mythic trilogy, right? But this is the first game. Ankh is actually the first game that was envisioned as part of a 3-part trilogy, right? It like in retrospect, it's easy to go like, oh, there was always meant to be 3 games, right? Just like, The Matrix was always meant to be 3 movies,
Sure.
right? Of course it was, right? Many years ago, when I was while I was working on Blood Rage, this would be in 2012. When I was working hardcore on it and doing deep development on the game, I was so excited and inspired by the game. I was like, there are other mythologies, the very specific mythologies that I grew up on from this book of folktales and legends from my grandmother in Germany that I got this really twisted perspective on. I was like, I want to work on those too. And there was 3 that came to my head. 3, I know. This readers are like, what 3? No, I'm not. There's not a 4th game coming. There's not a 4th game coming, right? But it was right. But the 3 I was thinking about were Egypt, was feudal Japan, and ancient Greece. And ancient Greece, I was like, but there's too many games exactly like that. And I was a big fan of Cyclades at the time, and I was like, this is fine. I don't need to make a game. I'm good.
Yeah.
But I was sort of thinking about what would later become Ankh and Rising Sun kind of around the same time. And for a period, I was thinking about doing Ankh first, because I was a little bit I was inspired by it, but then I sort of lost the thread, and I couldn't like the inspiration wasn't coming together quite well yet. And then I got the major inspiration for Rising Sun. So I was like, all right, I backburnered Ankh, went hardcore into Rising Sun. But in the middle of Rising Sun, back in 2016, I started like this is during the last 75% through the way development, when I start, when you playtest the game 100 times already and you're like, oh God, when is this over? I start shiny new things, right? I was already starting to think about Ankh at that point. So I would say as early as, sorry, not 2017, sorry, 2016.
Okay.
When I started thinking seriously about going, this is a series. This is clearly going to be a series. And and I'm going to do this game.
Awesome. So once you had that idea, you're in your Rising Sun development, how did you get from your idea of Ankh, or you wanted to have an ancient Egypt game, into a playable prototype?
So this one's different. The Ankh is very different from what usually happens with me. Usually, when I'm inspired to do something, I usually have a playable prototype within like 24 hours or 48 hours, right? I usually, my first versions come together really, really fast because I'm very, very inspiration motivated. And I generally don't dwell on designs if inspiration's not coming, right? If I have an idea, I feel like I want to do a game like this, but if it doesn't start gelling really quickly, that means my subconscious hasn't been doing the hard work in the background, and I'm like, I just kind of lose the thread a little bit, right? Or I delegate it to background. I do a lot of design subconsciously. I do, like, there's a saying, like, I do a lot of my best thinking when I'm thinking about something else. And so every once in a while, this happened with Rising Sun, I was like, all right, sit in front of the computer. It's like, I haven't worked on this in a while. Brain, what you got? And the brain's like, cough, here's a game, right? Ankh was not like that. Ankh actually took several months. I was a little bit lost in the original inspiration because, I was like, Rising Sun was just a behemoth, right? We knew that Kickstarter was going to be big. Unlike Blood Rage, we didn't expect that one to be big. So we knew it was going to be big. So I was like, all right, I got to focus on all this amazing content that we got to do, right? And I have to assume that everything will be printed, right? So I had to make sure that I didn't even show anybody anything unless I was happy with it. So I was so focused on Rising Sun and I was a big fan of Kemet at the time by Matago, right? And so I'm like, just like with Cyclades, I'm like, you know what? If this game is like Kemet, I don't feel the need. The world doesn't need another Kemet, right? Kemet exists. It's a great game, right? But Kemet wasn't really focused on the gods, right? And Rising Sun and Blood Rage did. And it was very clear to me at that point that the trilogy has to be about gods, monsters, and warriors, area control, and the map, right? That vision crystallized about halfway through Rising Sun, that was going to be the unifying thread for all these games. There's a long way of answering your question, but it took me a few months before I had something playable. And that first playable game of Ankh had nothing to do with the game that you're looking at right today. Like, nothing.
So how do you actually make your prototypes? Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, are you prototyping in TTS? Are you, cutting cards? Like, what's your process for actually creating the prototype?
Sure, absolutely. So, remember, back then there was, I guess there was TTS back then, but Tabletop Simulator, right? But when I started working on Ankh, pretty seriously, it was 2017, right? There was no pandemic. I didn't touch Tabletop Simulator as a game designer until lockdown, right? So, generally speaking, I have a range of different ways I work on stuff depending on what kind of game it is. With the big box games, especially with the Mythic games, I do the thing that designers tell new designers never to do. I'm very focused on aesthetics and making it pretty and making it very and highly functional. I'm even down to color swatches, color choices. If you look at some of my original prototypes for Blood Rage and Rising Sun, I mean, they don't look nearly as pretty as CMON did, but the UX is there. The wireframing is there. It looked very much like a very ugly version of what you see today.
Nice. That's cool.
Um, but so I work in InDesign, Adobe InDesign. That's my tool of choice. Mostly because I mean I've worked with publishers for a long time, and InDesign is generally the output for most printers, right? Like most manufacturers use InDesign. So I was like, why not cut out the middleman? A lot of graphic
Sure.
designers use either Illustrator or InDesign.
Okay.
And since I just do a lot of card games, I like to do rapid pagination, right?
Mm.
So I do that. So I spend um, to answer your question, I do a lot of visual design, a lot of visual design. I'm the exact opposite, I think, of a lot of German designers. I don't touch a spreadsheet until I know the game is fun. I've been doing this for a very long time, so I've got a pretty decent sense of what's balanced or not. So I just kind of trust my intuition to start with. The
Okay.
only thing I care about is this game delivering the full experience, right? I have this vision of in my head what it's like I'm walking through a convention or I'm walking through a game store, a cafe. I'm watching players play the game, right? What are they arguing about? What kind of interactions are
Mm.
they having? What's the table talk like? How are they playing with the toys? um, Rising Sun was very, very focused on components, right? And no, because it's a CMON game, and Ankh was no different. So I actually made little bits, little bits.
Nice.
I've got piles of meeples right everywhere. I've got tons of custom components. So I built something fairly pretty. But
Cool.
again, what I built has nothing to do with the game you see today.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. So, at what point did you start uh, documenting rules for Ankh?
This is where I get in trouble. Designers hate me for this. When did I start documenting rules for Ankh? I write so for the big box games, I actually I write a bullet list of rules. I don't even bother with formatting because I'm not a great rules writer, right? I have a style of that I like for rule books. It's not compatible with the way most publishers want to write rule books. So and it's not my choice, right? And trust me, you probably don't want to read a rule book written by me anyway, right? I have a very specific. I, I'm very, very video game focused. I love the way that video games do experiential learning, right?
Mm.
And so and I write in plain English and try to avoid technical talk whenever possible, which is usually not correct. So I write a punch list. Um, and I did not write anything down, frankly, until we had to go to our external rules writer way after the game was in development. So this would have been like 5 months before the Kickstarter, I think.
Okay, okay. So you're just kind of teaching people when you play it.
That's right. And look, this is. I'm not saying this is the right way. A lot of designers just watch this and went like, "Oh my god." Um, but this is something that's bespoke to me. I don't work on a ton of games at once, right? I know it sounds like it. People are I do release more than one game a year, but I
Hmm.
don't work on a ton of games. I work on a ton of ideas and throw them away very fast. And one part of my process for doing that is I never ever write anything down. And I don't work on games unless I become obsessed with them. And when I become obsessed with a game, I remember every detail, like no, without question. And I do that to myself on purpose, right? So I don't get mired in exceptions or corner cases or rules hacks or stuff like that, right? I let
Yeah.
it go. I let it ride as long as possible. Then after, when it comes time to write the rules, like, all right, now here comes the next gauntlet, right? But I don't worry about at all for big box games, especially. I don't worry at all about how it's going to be presented at the time. I'm focused entirely on the experience.
Yeah, that's really awesome and interesting because you can tell there are four actions. Like I've played Ankh twice where I've taught the game and the rule book is great, by the way. The rule book turned out great. Whoever,
Oh,
contributed to
no,
that.
thanks to me. That,
Yeah, whoever
that yeah.
whoever did that, it's an excellent rule book. But it's also just a very easy game to teach because there are 4 actions, and each action is very straightforward. Sure, when different events occur, there are more rules, but it's very straightforward. So, so I could see where you wouldn't really need to have a rule book kind of drafted when you're playtesting and prototyping and everything for this one.
Absolutely. Well, so I design visually. So what you're looking at, the way that board is set up, looks almost identical to the prototypes that I had, right? Because that's how I teach. I like to be able to, and often I do this, right? If I'm teaching a game, I'll teach part of the rules.
Yeah.
Right. I'll just get you started, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of stop and sort of drift off and just see if people's assumptions take them the rest of the way. Right. And then just start taking note of when they don't. And so what you're talking about is precisely because everything's laid out the way it is. Right. So your eyes drag you in reading order for like through the journey of the game, right? In the tactical, right, the actions, and the strategic, right? The events. You get that zoom in, zoom out feel when you're looking at it.
What was your playtesting process like, and how much playtesting was done for Ankh?
Oh God, an ungodly amount. All right, I'm gonna have to answer this a very, very long way because I teased you twice here saying that what I first designed had nothing to do with this, right? I actually designed basically 3 completely different games. The first game that I made was, for all intents and purposes, Rising Sun with pyramids. I didn't play test it that much. I played a few games just to see, and I was like, with some of my local groups, I was like, this feels like Rising Sun. It works. I could see it being fun. And there's a point very early, like after like 3 or 4 play tests, where I like essentially like put a metaphorical gun to my head, right, and go like, all right, assume I'm going to solve all the problems, assuming everything's going to work. What is the best version this game is going to be, right? Yeah. And that's how I sort of decide whether I'm going to continue working on it or not. And I look at this as like, this could, at the best, this would just be another version of Rising Sun for a very, very slightly different taste. So it was a very negotiation-heavy game about nomadic area control, right? Which is what Rising Sun is. I'm like, I already did that. I already did Rising Sun. So I literally just threw the game away. I right-clicked the folder, threw it in the trash, never looked at it again.
Okay.
Took several months off. Then, the first version was not from the point of view of the gods. The first version was a game that and the game wasn't called Ankh at the time. It was actually my original vision for the game was a game called Book of the Dead, which was actually about, and you see that actually it's in the subtext of this game, right? Mm-hmm. But it was about the cycle of Mat, of life, death, rebirth, and that is told by the Book of the Dead. So it was very focused on the human level of the game, and where the gods were essentially like the bad guys of the game, right?
Gotcha.
And I was like, okay. Everybody at CMON hated the title Book of the Dead. Like, I hated it. Like, they liked my other titles, but they hated it. I remember arguing. I'm gonna call him out on this. One of our producers, Guilherme Goulart, he would write me like on an almost weekly basis. It's like, is it still called Book of the Dead? I hate this title. This is the worst title ever. Usually you're good at titles. This one is terrible. I will quit if this is the game we do. I'm obviously hyperbolizing, right?
Right.
Like hyperbolizing, right? But it was difficult for me to remain excited about it when like everybody else was not into it.
Right.
I hit that moment where I was like, this game at its best is going to be a bit like Kemet, and that exists already. So I put it away for several months. Then it occurred to me, of course, right? Then like late 2017, maybe early 2018, after I'd moved to Singapore to work at CMON, I picked up the gauntlet again. I was like, oh my God, of course this game's about the gods, of course, right? And one of my tests for a vision of the game is when the game comes out, if people assume that was always what the game was meant to be, right? Yeah, obviously it's only about the gods, right?
Yeah, of course.
It wasn't always about the gods. This one had a bit of an identity crisis at first, but but then it was like that. I was like, oh my God, of course it's about the gods. Of course it is. And I actually went back to my old book of folktales, right? And I started rereading my old stories, and I was like, of course it is. And so I don't do deep scholarly work, right? Like these games are not scholarly works of the they are fantasy, they're IPs, they're literally based on my interpretation of this, like with a point of view, with a really weird point of view, but we'll talk about that later. I was like, I looked at the picture of Amon-Ra, right? I'm like, that's what this game is. Of course it is, right? It's like only what is unique, or at least close to unique for the Egyptian pantheon. What does the average person know about the Egyptian gods? Like, well, Amon-Ra, they actually joined together to become one. I'm like, that's this game. That's the heart of this game. And then I got excited again.
Yeah.
Right? And then 24 hours later, I had a prototype. Right. That is the first version that became this, the game that we played.
Awesome.
Now, that didn't answer your question at all, because you were like, how much did you play test? Hundreds of games.
And what is your process like for playtesting? Like, do you play with your local group, or, does CMON have a group of playtesters? Like, what was the process like?
This one was, this was different. I normally, in the past, when I lived in Toronto, which I'm back here in Toronto now, we had an excellent network of playtesters, like 200 plus playtesters in Toronto. It's a mecca of gaming. And cool. My wife runs a playtest, essentially. She runs a playtest program for us, organizes it, sets things up. And so we had and Toronto is amazingly diverse. So, and I value that very highly, as if that wasn't obvious, right? But like we want to have as many playtesters from as many diverse backgrounds as possible, including diverse gaming backgrounds, right?
Awesome.
Including non-gaming, right? So we would play, I was Monday, Thursday, every day, every week, all the time. That's what we used to do. Problem is, I'd moved to Singapore when I started working on this game. So I'd started from scratch. So I actually playtested this game only with 2 groups of players for a while, right? Because the first few tests are not really about is this game balanced, is whatever. It's literally the poor playtest. I'm like, all right, you're gonna play the game. I'm just gonna sit back and I'm gonna decide if I'm gonna keep working on it, right?
Yeah.
Right, and that's literally what that was. So we did that. I did that for months, right? I really took my time with this and just let them play, and then messed around with it, let them play, messed around with it. We went through a whole other version of the game, which was close to this, but missing some fundamental components. When I got to this version, then I went back and I Then I went back and did a lot of external testing with our playtesters back at home. I went to conventions all the time. One of the things I did when I was in Singapore, I would go to 12 to 14 conventions a year. And so I would playtest like mad. So I got a lot of that done. We playtested in Singapore. When the game went into development, the 2 developers, Marco and Leo, they have an excellent playtest network in Brazil. So they playtested every day.
Cool.
Right. Then COVID. Right. And so... Yeah. Then we just started playtesting on Tabletop Simulator a lot. But we actually playtested this game more than any other game because we had the digital side component, right? I never playtest games in TTS to figure out if they're fun. I never do that, right? I don't play the game in TTS until I know I'm not really going to change it fundamentally, unless I know the haptics are good, I know the graphics are good. I'm just data mining now, right? We're just testing over to do micro changes. So we did a ton of those. I would say more than any other game.
Very cool. So interesting.
That was very different. Very, very different. That's not... I'm back to my old way of playtesting, except now with a side order of TTS. So that last Ankh, it broke me a little bit. We can talk about that later. Yeah. It did refine my process overall, because Tabletop Simulator has changed the game in the sense that I can now do... I don't have to go... I can do external playtesting, but I can do video-based external playtesting. So I can watch people as well as gather data, which is very important to me.
Yeah. Awesome. What was the biggest challenge you and your development team faced during designing Ankh?
Do I have to pick one?
You
This
can give
game
me a
had a
couple.
million. So, well, look. So one of this. So this these two games were Ankh's biggest challenge, right? Like, it had to come on the heels of Rising Sun and Blood Rage, and I was convinced the one through line that never changed. I was convinced that, or the, like, I was very interested in working on a game based on Egypt, but and I was happy with how different Rising Sun was from Blood Rage, but I was like, I wasn't super excited about working on a third game unless it was more different from these two games than they were from each other. I wanted to do a third act twist, right?
Gotcha.
So I did. I worked on a version. That was the second version that is not on the shelves today. That was so out there. I mean, it was like ridiculous. Like, it got existential, right? It was like it got to a point like, what is a game even, right? Like, it got really ridiculous. It was one of those things that like college student designers who were like, like when they don't know the technicalities of gaming, right? They're like, what could I do? How can I stretch the boundaries of what games can be, right? I got kind of hypnotized by that for a little while, and I put together some stuff that that literally made the developers, because I would give them sneak peeks, right? I'd show them. I worked on the game a year before the developers touched. No, sorry, a year and a half before the developers touched it. I give them little sneak peeks, right? This is what it's going to be like, and they would look at that second version. They're like, I have no idea how to develop this, right? And that got me excited, right? And so I went through that for a little while. I'm sorry, I forgot what your question was, because I'm now reliving this. I'm remembering the second version.
No, that's awesome. No, just like what were the biggest challenges you faced?
The biggest challenge. So the biggest challenge was well, okay. Like, the obvious answer is following these two games, but the CMON was amazing in the sense that they were like, look, dude, you have like, we're doing the third part of a very successful series, but the last thing we wanted, like, we're not going to rest on our laurels. We're not just going to make Rising Sun with pyramids. We're not going to do like, let's keep the artistic integrity of this intact, right? And I told them, like, I want this game to be different. I want people to come in assuming like, all right, this is going to be Rising Sun, and they go, whoa, this is not at all, right? It's got commonality. So with this game, unlike Blood Rage and Rising Sun, I had a general vision, but the distinct vision, like, Blood Rage had very clear ancestry, right? Blood Rage, I told people like Blood Rage is you could say Blood Rage is Risk brought into, like, is an Eric Lang style Risk area control game. Rising Sun, Eric Lang style diplomacy game. Ankh has no antecedents at all, right?
Gotcha.
I'm no Stanley Kubrick, right? Like I'm a commercial game designer, and I do have to deliver. I guess I'm answering the follow-up question to that. How'd you get over that challenge, right? The game had a bit of an identity crisis where I want to do so much. So I want the game to be so different, like so different from everything else, that people are like, wow, amazing, right? And I was like, wait a minute, are we actually looking for? Are we looking for like? Are we looking for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or something, or something even like more way wacky out of the way? When the other two games are essentially Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like high quality but some mainstream appeal, right?
Right.
I'm like, no, I need to do an excellent MCU film, right? Not a foreign art film,
right.
So I slept, right, and some of the designers that I talked to are like, oh man, I want to see this art film. Like, no, you don't. Like, I've been asked in interviews, can you please describe this art film that you were working on? I'll describe it, and they'll be like, wow, that sounds amazing. Yes, it sounds amazing. It's very easy to describe something that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing, is fun to play, holds up over time, are a Venn diagram that very rarely overlaps.
Yeah.
So I got excited when I realized I'm making an MCU film, but that doesn't mean I can't still do a third act twist, right? So finding the short version, finding the concrete vision for this game, realizing that it wasn't going to be based on based on Ancestor, and just go, no, this is a sandboxy experience, right? With simpler rules than both Rising Sun and Blood Rage, but more open-ended. Like, go ahead and make the game that players can just get lost in, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily have as clear a prescripted narrative as the other two games do. Because if you want a game like that, right? If you want rumble in the Bronx with a prescripted narrative, play Blood Rage. If you want open-ended player interaction and deal making with a prescripted narrative, play Rising Sun.
Rising Sun, yeah.
If you want to do the simple rules, like almost 90s Euro, with lots of combat and direct interaction, that's what this one is. So in a way, this is a little bit truer to my 15-year-old roots than the other two games were, but it ended up becoming its own thing.
Very cool. So I guess as a follow-up to that, what would you say? Like, were there any aha moments?
Nonstop. I mean, this game was nothing but aha moments, right? Well, this game was a roller coaster of existential crises, of career level crises, and aha moments, right? So I've got a novel's worth of them, but I'll tell you, I'll give you three, no more,
okay,
right?
Cool.
So when I said this game almost broke me, right? It did almost break me. Like this, I went through most games I work on that are successful. There's a point where I know they're going to be something special when I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea if this game's going to be good, right? Like I'm like, if this game's going to be good, or I have no idea if I'm even good as a designer. Like what? Like I go through that, like, oh my God,
questioning everything, yeah.
Right? Yeah, am I just a total hack? What's going on, right? and Blood Rage had that. Rising Sun had that. Ankh had it for months, months. I'm like, what the hell am I even trying to do? Have I lost the ability to define a clear vision? Have I have I lost the ability to tell a story? That kind of thing. So the aha moment was, the first one was the MCU moment, right? When I was like, no, I'm making this game as a summer blockbuster, but that means nothing about quality. I want to make the highest. To continue the analogy, right? I want to make the Avengers in the MCU, right?
Yeah.
Right. So like something that has a lot of quality, that's got lots of depth, yes, the film snobs will be like, oh, but the vast majority of our niche of the audience will find it approachable and accessible. That was the first big one. The second aha moment was when I decided to throw the second version of the game away. After I threw the second version of the game away, and I started working on this one. So you're talking about that action track, right? That
yes.
came together about. That was the centerpiece for the third version of the game, and that's when I knew the game was like. That's when I knew, like, all right, this is it. This is the game I'm going to see on the shelf, right?
Yeah. Cool.
Right, and so the other versions didn't have that very visually designed thing, because I was trying to go outside my own head and not do the thing that I normally do. This one, I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I just design a game the way I design games?
Yeah.
Right. Start with my dashboard, let it get out of the way as much as possible, and give players the minimum amount of interference to sculpt their own stories and show their own creativity, right? Basically, the second aha moment was like stop trying to be a different designer. You design games the way you design games.
Yeah.
Right? Do your thing, right?
Yeah.
That sounds so obvious, but I tried so long not to do that.
Yeah. Gotcha.
With this game. The third aha moment was remember I talked about the two gods becoming one, right? That was from that point, right? I was like, it was my that was the Loki strategy. It was the Loki strategy of Blood Rage. It was the yin yang partnerships in Rising Sun, right? I was like, oh my God, some people are going to hate this, and and like I was like, you know what? I don't care, right? I don't care. Like I know
Yeah.
that it is straightforward to make a game that is vaguely enjoyable to a lot of people, but there are thousands of games released every year. And since Blood Rage and Rising Sun, there have been many Blood Rage-esque and Rising Sun-esque games
Sure.
made, right? They're all very polished and they're like they're excellent games, right? I'm like, okay, like I don't want to just do that plus plus. I want to challenge something.
Mm.
Um, and so rather than make area control game number three, I want to make a game that made people fundamentally rethink what kind of decisions you make in Act One, Act Two, and Act Three of the game,
Yeah.
right? And so the big aha moment was like, some people are going to hate this. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it's just okay. Now the developers, poor developers, Marco and Leo, I cannot sing their praises as much because they were scared to death of the merchant mechanic, right?
Yeah.
They are rock solid developers. They know the developer's job, right? The designer's job is to go wild, right? And ask ridiculous questions like, hey, what could games be, and all that ridiculous stuff, right? Then come up with something that's solid, right? But the developer's job is to shape that into something that is understandable and is to turn the unknown into something we know. So they were like, but this opens up a whole bunch of new questions. I'm like, yeah, that's the point, right? That's the point. So I mean, their job was to challenge it, and they challenged the crap out of it, right? And you all have probably noticed that the merge mechanic was in the process of changing even when we started the Kickstarter, right? So
Okay.
it
Okay.
evolved into its final form even while we were doing that. But the essence that it has to be a catch-up mechanic for for the final two gods to become one, become
Mm-hmm.
really powerful, and that has to permeate every piece of the design, both obviously and subtly, was non-negotiable. Like
Yeah.
we went through a point where we're like if we get to a point where the only answer is to cut this mechanic, I don't want to make the game.
Yeah. It's unique. It's really unique. I can't think of another game where something like that happens.
Well, not exactly like this, right? And so that I mean, of course I read the forums, right? I try not to read them too much, but like I promise you that I'm trying not to sound like hot or I don't know what do you want to call it, like arrogant or something. But I pretty much telegraphed every like the first few threads on BGG like word for word, right? Like we do that, right? We do that. Like we play this game a lot, and we get reactions from playtesters a lot, right? So we make a lot of assumptions on how it's going to be taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the people who like it going to say? What are people who don't like it going to say, right?
Right.
Um, um, so far, we have not been overly surprised, right? What I haven't been what's delighted me is that a lot of people haven't seen I haven't seen a lot of talk yet about how subtly the merge mechanic actually affects the component design of the game as well, right? So yes, obviously it has implications on players, but also had a huge amount of implications on how the gods were designed. They were not only designed to be a player power for you to change the game, like they did in Rising Sun, but they're also designed to be part of a duo, right? So what does this god
Ah,
do by themselves, and what does this god bring to the table as part of a merge,
cool.
right? And so that set of combinatorics made the game like wild and interesting for me, and which is like I've seen a lot of questions like why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that with any of these gods? I'm like, because they have to do two things,
Yeah.
right? They've got their own god and part of a duo.
Ah, and I'm sure that added a lot of complexity to development and play testing and everything, making sure that every combination works together.
A lot of redesigns and a lot of thrown away. Yeah, a lot of stuff thrown away. The gods were probably the single most in this game were more redesigned than the clans of Rising Sun were by quite a bit. By quite a bit. And that was I mean, the development of this game was rough. It was very, very rough, right? It was literally a point of adversarial, like Marco and Leo were there to essentially try their best to not just break the game. That's the obvious, but to showcase like, well, this work. This doesn't play the way that design promises that it plays, right? Right. That was and so whenever they were right, we're like, okay, it doesn't matter how cool this sounds. We gotta change it. We gotta fix it, right? My job was to be the person in the room to go from time to time when they say, but what if this happens, or what if this feels bad, or what if this happens? My job was to go, so what? Right. So what? I need you to answer, so what?
Yeah.
Right. So we didn't because I want to make sure not to overdevelop the game, not to sandpaper off all of the rough edges, and not to over course correct for any potential harsh feelings. This is a game about conflict and fundamentally what Eurogamers call negative interaction, right? I'm killing your stuff. I'm taking your stuff, right? It's got that in it, right?
Yeah.
We balance that as best as we can. We make the journey as exciting as possible. But like there are feel bad moments in this game that are there, right? This game doesn't protect players from themselves as much as Blood Rage and Rising Sun does. You can screw yourself in this game. My hope is the shorter playtime makes up for that, right? This is a game that rewards investment. This game also has there's a big risk to this game that we took. Right? With the teach of this game, you said it's simple, right? It is, but the rules teach is simple, but the tactical and strategic teach, how to play this game well, is a brick wall, right? That's a risk, right? And so, like, I know there's tons of games released, and some people are not going to give the game a second chance if they do badly the first game. We're taking a risk that, you know what? I want you to lose, still make a bunch of milestones, still be able to do a bunch of cool stuff, but still be intrigued enough to go to be compelled enough, or to have a strong enough emotional reaction to go, I got to play this again to find out why I lost, right? Or to try something, or try something wildly different.
Yeah. And I'm kind of bouncing back a little, but now I'm curious to know, like, the actual Ankh powers that each god has, you know. When did you, like, at what point did you come up with those? And were they a part of, like, version 2, or did they become a part of version 3, or was that always the plan to have these Ankh powers?
Version 2 had gods, and yes, so Ankh powers, yes. So the game, like I said, the game wasn't always called Ankh. It actually had a different name, and I frankly don't remember what the name was. It went through a bunch of, unlike Rising Sun and Blood Rage, whose names were locked in right away. After I lost Book of the Dead, I kind of drifted for a while, and I was like, can I just call the game? I even remember can I call it AEGYPT? I was like, oh my god, I'm fired. I don't get to name this game. Ankh actually, I did not come up with the name Ankh. I think it was either the senior producer or the executive producer. We just went, we sat in a room, and I was just sitting there, being grumpy. Because whenever I can't come up with something quickly, I get really, really grumpy. And so I'm like, I'm useless. I don't even want to say anything. So they just bandied names back and forth. And I was like, I hate these kind of brainstorms. Right. And somebody said Ankh. I'm like, oh, interesting. I don't know if I like it,
but interesting.
We'll see. But then it was like,
cool.
but then I was like, wait, Ankh, Gods of Egypt. If we call it Ankh : Gods of Egypt,
sold.
I'm on board. I like that, right?
Yeah.
That took a week. But anyway, sorry, I answered a very
different question. No, that's cool, because I was gonna ask, I always ask how you come up with the name too, so you just answered that without me needing to ask it. So.
This one was different. With the other two games, I knew what they were called right away. Right? Okay. Well, that's not true. Blood Rage was Ragnarok for a long time, until I accidentally called the game Blood Rage when I was talking to Adrian Smith. And then the game was just called Blood Rage forever.
That's awesome.
So I knew that the players were going to have gods, and I knew that there was going to be, I knew they were going to have a tech tree.
Yeah.
Right. They were going to have a tech tree that was non-bespoke. It had to be the same for everybody, because that was clear from day one. You're going to have a number of powers that you can navigate. that I didn't want to be unique to your god. Every god has a unique power. That's just, I'm
Sure.
very big about this in my designs, as you can see, right? I love single punchy like powers that change the game, but not a matrix of powers that you have to like. I want to be able to look at your sheet and know exactly how you change the game. I don't want to have to navigate my way through little stuff.
Yeah.
So the Ankh powers was very important to me that this tech tree was common to everybody, that you could look at your own sheet to see what other players were, how other players were going to build, right? And of course, the fact that each Ankh, that the Ankh powers, the tech tree of Ankh powers, interacts differently with every god, right?
Yeah.
I wanted them to be to ride the tightrope of tactical and strategic. You can come to the game with a plan. You can go, all right, yes, the playbook says, right, that Sobek actually wants to end up with splendiference in most scenarios. Let's try it this way. But so many of them are adaptive. They force you to change your mind halfway through the game. That was very, very important to me. In version 2 of the game, it was actually literally a tech tree. Like I literally had this connects to this, right? And yes, that always sounds interesting. And I showed it to some people, especially game designers, like, wow, cool. Like, it wasn't that. It was just complicated. It wasn't necessarily interesting. So like, you know what? The rest of the game is sandboxy. This should be sandboxy too. Pick two, right? That's it.
Yeah.
And that way, it's still actually a tech tree, but it's just not. It's more combinatorial, right?
Yeah.
The powers themselves changed. I mean, constantly. I mean, they were the like I knew what the vision for those needed to be, and I came up with a set that was for the Kickstarter, knowing that they were still going to change as we continued developing the game. The overall vision though was locked in from day one, and the Ankh powers themselves, I think, were some of development's greatest contributions. Right, they not only challenged them, right, but there were points where we had to knock out an Ankh power. Like there were two, I think, that broke from the not broke, but they destabilized the experience for too many gods, or they were redundant with too many gods, and we're like, all right, let's just brainstorm. And I remember, so it's hard to remember individually, but I remember Marco came up with one of them that was in the middle, I can't even remember now, which in the middle tree, in the middle part of the tree. I was like, oh my God, that's the one. Do that. That was great. And then we just kept going back and forth. But that was, that took forever. There was one version I remember. This is a design show, right? So here, I'll draw you a picture because I remember this very clearly. This is like, here's a case of, like, I'm talking very philosophical. Let's get practical for a second. So I remember there was a case where I had a version. I still think I might have it here somewhere, right? Where the Ankh powers look like this. Right, I designed them visually. They look like that, right?
Okay.
And so you start at one spot, and then you could only go left or right. So you have to make a choice. Where do I start? And so it's a tech tree already, right? But
Gotcha.
it was cool.
That's neat.
It was neat, right? It was very interesting, right?
Yeah.
But it was distracting, right? It was distracting. People were spending too much of their time looking at that tech tree and not necessarily this is a game of a lot of moving parts. So I ended up going like, no, a little bit more straightforward leads to better gameplay in that particular case.
Totally. Cool. Yeah, I love the Ankh system, like the tokens, and it is really helpful and very streamlined and clean. The fact that everybody has the same powers on their board, so you can look over and see like, oh, they have it on the second slot of level 2. I know what I know what they can do.
That's right.
And
that's right. Yeah, that was very, very important. That particular decision, by the way, was questioned as often as in Blood Rage. Why don't the clans have original powers? It's like it was one of the most asked questions I get, right? Mm-hmm. And I defend that to the death to today for the exact reason you're talking about. This game is not about a micro matrix of tech. Like this is not a hermetic game. Like if this was more like an Uwe Rosenberg game, right? Which by the way, like mad respect, right? But like a game of serenity and puzzle building for yourself, right?
Right.
With competitive drafting, right? Then of course right? Then yeah, of course you want this labyrinth of
Right.
decisions. But no, this game is played above the table as much as it's played like
Right.
on your own player board. So like I have to respect the player's bandwidth,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of those choices were made with what I call a bandwidth allowance budget, right? So like this part of the game must be as low bandwidth as possible while still being unique, compelling, and as BGGers like to call, agonizing.
Totally, totally. And it makes the game, yeah, even more accessible to play too. How were the art and graphic design decisions made for Ankh? I think it's undeniable how incredible the miniatures are and just the artwork. If you walk by any of these 3 games in your Mythic series, they're gorgeous and they stand out. How are some of those design decisions made?
Oh, sure, sure. So yeah, I can talk in great detail about that. So
Cool.
this is so we talk a lot about the band when it comes to this game, right? So there's there are besides like obviously every game is a huge team effort done by a lot of people, but there's 4 core people that were involved that were the same in this game, right? Not including executive producer David Preddy, but who literally put the band together. He's the Bob Rock of this studio, right? Right, but it was like me as designer. Adrian Smith was the artist, right, the lead artist for all of them. Matthew Avlo, which is he's the lead graphic designer. I don't know if he did all the graphic design for this. He had a team on this, but he was the vision keeper, right?
Okay.
And Tiago Rania, who was the producer, right? He was my foil, right? The guy who wanted to make sure that everything was written as technically as possible. I want to make sure everything's English as possible. So we have that awesome yin yang thing going
Cool.
on, right?
Cool.
Right. So that group was consistent between all 3 of these games. So Adrian, turns out, is even though I come to these games with to these mythologies with a very particular interpretation, Adrian knows all the stuff back and forth, backwards and frontwards. So he's he in this game, I would go, all right, here's the list of monsters I want, right? And by the way, I also need 5 more. Go for it, right? Just give me 5, surprise me. I'll fit them. I'll make it work, right? That was Blood Rage. Rising Sun, I was like, all right, here's right, same thing, right? But give me 10 more, right? With Ankh, I'm like, all right, I know, here's a list of all the gods that I know should be in the game, but I don't know if we're going to be able to use them all. What do you think? And he, and because we're right in the Egyptian pantheon, right? Like a lot of what we call the guardians are also in the pantheon. They're gods, right? They're lesser gods. So like I had to draw a line of demarcation, right? Like in this world, what crosses over to gods and what stays as guardian? We made an artistic choice there. And literally, I know this is going to sound the way it sounds, but it's how big is the miniature, right? Right? If Adrian, there's obvious ones, right? Amun, Ra, Isis, right? They obviously, if everybody knows them, they're there, right? But when it got to like a slightly deeper cut, Sobek, Hathor, right? They could fall on either side of the line. So I was like, all right, what are you inspired to do, right? What was Adrian's society? If he was inspired to make him huge, right? They're gods.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're guardians, right?
Okay.
That was sort of how that went. When it comes to graphics, like I said, I'm a very visual designer, so I came to this game just like with Rising Sun with a very, very clear okay, the board's got to look like this. It must be hexes. These are the way the spaces have to be. I prefer this color palette. Now, Mathieu is he's no slouch, right? He doesn't just go, okay, do that, right? He comes back and he's like a developer, but for graphics. He challenges every decision that was made. Are you sure this is the better way to play? Are you sure this shouldn't go here? Are you sure this shouldn't go here? And he's a very practical-minded guy. So in some cases, he was like, I was like, no, you're totally right, 100%, right? Let's do it your way, right? Sure. I'm trying to remember. There were a couple of decisions I know that of mine that he reversed. That was like, nope, you're 100% right. We should do it your way. Oh yeah. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the TTS mod in here.
Oh.
The devotion track. I was like, the devotion track's got to go top to bottom. It has to, because it's got to feel like you're rising in devotion, right? And I want it to be intuitive, right? But then we ended up with a lot of problems because then we were actually limited by component space, right? How long can the devotion track actually be, right? And as we went through development, I knew like this, and like I knew like there's two things that are important on the devotion track, right? Like how many spaces there are, of course, and where the line is, right? Where's the elimination line, right?
Yeah.
So that changed a lot in development, right? I mean, the vision never changed, but the number
Right.
changed.
Yeah.
Like we had to play in development, right? Where does that line have to be? It actually needs to be 3 lower, or sorry, 3 higher.
Okay.
Right? And like, oh well, now it doesn't fit. Now what? And Mathieu's like, no, it's a snake, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, it works, and it actually is
Looks
more thematically appropriate, right? So he's
That's
excellent,
cool.
and I don't want to diminish his team who execute on a lot of the graphic design. They did a great job. The like Mathieu and I go back and forth a lot. Like I'm very lowbrow, right? So I'm not going to be the one who goes like, no, I needed to like, I'm not going to have themes and sub themes when it comes to art itself. I was going to like this is green, but this is green and please make it look cool. And I'm usually the guy that gives feedback on like when they give something and like, oh, this is too artistic, right? I'll be like, this is a little too highbrow, right? Or this is distracting from gameplay, right? That's generally the feedback I give. But I don't like on the art, like where they put the flourishes and embellishments, that's all their team. The cover, I remember in all 3 games, we went back and forth several times. Adrian has like amazing ideas for the cover, right? And he was trained by former CMON games to put a lot of stuff on the cover, right? And so I would just complain. I'm like, I would complain like a little whiner, like no, like it's too busy. It's too busy.
Yeah.
It's an amazing piece of art, but it's too busy. And then like Adrian would be like, fine, boom, and this came out, right?
Yeah.
Like that. I'm like, that's amazing.
So
You're
bad.
like, right? And with Rising Sun, the same. Like he did this. I don't know if you can see in the background of Rising Sun. He did this amazing, thematically appropriate montage, right? But it's too busy. It's too busy. Can we just have a guide? It's like, all right, fine, amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Pops.
The essence of the game. With Ankh, we didn't go through that at all. He was like, I know what you're gonna do. Right. Here it goes. And this, he gave us 3 cover options. We picked this one and never looked back.
Cool. Yeah, it's bold in its signature.
I don't think any adjustments were made to that whatsoever.
That's cool. By then, he just knew.
Absolutely. And the logos were all done by Mathieu. I was like, here's a bunch of bad ideas just to get you inspired, right?
Yeah.
He took them all, threw in the garbage, and did those instead. I had no idea. I had no ideas for Ankh. I'm like, I don't know how to make Ankh look good. And so he just said, this.
Yeah. And it looks great.
One take. We never changed it.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, and then the miniatures are some of the most detailed miniatures I've ever seen in my life. Like I look at the back of some of the gods and I'm like, oh my goodness, like look at all the detail on that cape, or it's incredible.
That's right. We have an incredible sculpting team, and the art, and Adrian is also like, I mean, he knows how to design art because he worked with Games Workshop for so long, right? He knows how to design art so that it is sculptable. I like my involvement in the steps between art and sculpting. That's all Tiago and David Preddy, right? Like the art goes into a black hole, and I get pictures of sculpts, and I just go, wow, amazing. I think I give like 3 or 4 notes per thing, but that's about it.
Yeah, so it's really cool. So when did you know that Ankh was finished, or how did you know it was finished? Like when did you decide to say, okay,
just like the other 2 games.
Kickstarter?
Like the other 2 games, we had a publication deadline.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd work on the games forever, we we got to a point where we were happy with it about a month and a half before publication deadline, but were like, let's still mess around with it a little bit. Let's still keep messing. Just before the Kickstarter, so Ankh itself actually was probably the most done of all the games but so what happens is when things get close to done, then I end up throwing a fly in the ointment anyway. So what ended up happening with Ankh, the way the scenarios were designed, right? The way the scenarios that was actually a very late addition to the game. What ended up happening was I knew that because the game was so sandboxy, I knew the game needed to have a number of setups, right? But I didn't want to do the chess-like setup, and I didn't want to open us up to too prescriptive gameplay. So I'm like, all right, we're gonna have to do a book of setups, right? These book of setups are all gonna have their own themes. They're gonna have their own story to it. And then I think maybe 4 months before the Kickstarter, I was like, oh, wait a minute. What if we got to, because the game was a little bit more complex, What if I got to make it a little bit less complex? I get to take a little bit out of that and offload some of that onto the scenario design and actually have that be baked into the game, right? So it's not scenarios like Zombicide. It's actually 10 ways to play the game. And and also to optimize player counts. Like every game like this, like Blood Rage scales naturally. Rising Sun scales naturally, but like you talk to a lot of players, they'll tell you that there are optimum player counts, right? With this game, I'm like, I don't want that. Let's add a little bit of complexity to go, here's the 2-player scenario, but here's more than one. Here's 2 of them. We didn't want it to be afterthoughts. I actually want to build them into the spine of the game. And each scenario, as you can see, highlights a different aspect of the game. Right, so sometimes you're going to care a lot about holding territory. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're going to care a lot about winning battles. Sometimes you're not, right? And so, like what you're looking at, like I know people are saying like, oh, I can't wait for more scenarios. Like there aren't any. Like this is not designed that way. This is not designed to be in like the infinite scenarios of the game. I invite players to make their own. I designed a ton. They all suck. These were designed so with the game in mind that I actually made changes. We made changes to the Ankh powers based on the scenario design. They were that tightly woven into the game.
Cool.
Right, and they ended up informing each other. But when I hit that, right, well, there's 4 months before the Kickstarter, assets had already been made. I'm like, we got to do this. We have to do this. And the poor producers and the poor Kickstarter team, poor them, right? They like to be prepared, right? And I was like, I'm really sorry, but no, we got to do this. We just have to, because it just elevated the game so much. And we did this, like we went to the Kickstarter without all this. They weren't all done. We knew they were going to be done, but I'm like, I'm not going to show anything that isn't thought through all the way, right? I'm just going to show the ones that we have play tested and gone through, but we spent like the majority of the last 6 months after that were on scenario design, just to make sure they were woven very, very deeply into the gameplay. The other thing that we did with this game was I wanted to make sure that the expansions for this game, like I didn't want to just go I didn't want to go, all right, here's a bunch of new content, right? Like we wanted to make sure that each content has a specific place in the overall experience. So spent a lot of time on the Pharaoh expansion, also did a fundamental redesign right before the Kickstarter, where the Pharaoh box was going to have another bunch of scenarios, right? And we made some, and it was fine. But I was like I know how people play games nowadays, right? Especially people who are deeply in franchise, right? They're not going to play the game another 15 times. What's the most value we can give to a player? Like 15 more scenarios, and then you only play these scenarios when you're playing with the Pharaoh. Then I threw a bomb in the ointment again, said to the developers, no, what we're going to do is we're actually going to give the Pharaohs personality and make them plug in to existing scenarios. So no new scenarios.
Yeah.
Instead, the Pharaohs are going to overlay that. And so that way, like you get like you get maximum value and maximum combinatorics out of getting this expansion. The Pharaoh expansion is my proudest moment, I think, as an expansion designer, because I think I think it's an incredible expansion. But B, it's not necessary. It makes the game more complicated unapologetically, but people who want the streamlined experience, who want Blood Rage level complexity, you play the core box.
Yeah.
You can be fine with that forever. If you want to also have hand management, if you also want to have a minor deck building element, which was in version 2 of the game, right? But I took it out because it was too complex. If you want that to weave into the rest of the game, if you want a more linear sense of momentum and power level gain, you play with the Pharaoh expansion. Cool. But it's not necessary. It's just optimized for the players who want that kind of experience.
Yeah, that's how expansions usually work best, you know.
It's how they should work, right?
Yeah.
I never want them to be considered necessary,
right?
Or fix, or like, well, this expansion makes the game play the way it's supposed to play.
Right.
Fine, like sometimes it does that, right? Sometimes later after we're like, oh, I know how to improve the game, right? Expansion.
Right.
But generally, I want them to be a huge amount of value. Like you buy you buy all these components, but I want that to change up the game significantly. To change the game significantly, but keep the essence of the game. And
right.
I'm not telling you stuff you don't already know. I just want it to be like these Kickstarters are expensive. We charge a lot of money for these things, and people pay a lot of money for this. And I really, really want to respect the investment people are making in this game, right? So like, rather than just throw a bunch of plastic at you, let's really change up gameplay and make you feel like and make it feel worth it that you bought all this stuff for it.
Yeah, totally. So far, it's worth it for me already. Just 2 plays.
Well, let me know. Let me know after you get 10 games into it, right?
Yeah, I will. But yeah, I mean, with the Mythic series here, I feel like and I haven't played Rising Sun yet. I've played Blood Rage. I was really impressed. I've only played it once, but I'm really like stoked to play it more. Luckily, I have a friend who lives nearby who has a copy. But I want to know, do you have any advice for somebody who's, an aspiring game designer who's interested in making kind of a innovative or unique area control game? Because I feel like these are all very, like, they have some special twist on the area control, and it's really refreshing every time I play one of your designs.
Right. Well, I mean, so that's well, I'm glad I asked you to surprise me with this. So like, I get a lot of do you have advice for game designers? But so it's like, I mean, I know what the answer to this is, but I need to phrase this carefully because it's going to sound really glib otherwise, right?
Okay.
Like these games are very personal to me, right? These games are designed to play the way I want games to play. So there's a lot of my own taste and my own DNA in these games, right? So my glib answer is, well, be me, right? If another designer who was tasked to make a Viking area control game would make a very different game from Blood Rage because they're not me. I would not say that that's the correct way to do it or the incorrect way to do it. That's the joy of like games that are this level of complexity allow you for a little bit more personal expression, right? Like where the design really matters. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and sort of sidestep your question and go like, rather than go, I want to do a quick twist on area control, like spend the time, like examine the area control games that you like, examine why you like them, examine what you don't like about them, right? And look for what is to you a hole in your shelf space, right? What's missing? What do I want to play that I'm not playing, right? So area control games for me, like, so, I mean, look, I didn't invent area control by any stretch, right? Like I'm standing on Wolfgang Kramer's shoulders, right? Like El Grande changed my life and it informed so much about the way I think about games, right? It's the root of the way I think about area control. I know a lot of games have been done since then, but as far as I'm concerned, very few can top what he did with El Grande. But the reason why I'm saying that, the thing I don't so if you date area control back to access and allies and risk, right? What's the point of area control? It's to hold territory, right? The narrative arc of that game is a tug of war, right? I'm holding it now for a while. You're holding it for a while. I'm holding it for a while, and it's generally at the same while being a tug of war, it's a linear burst story of power, right? As I gain power, I take it from you, right? So I don't like that, believe it or not. Like I don't enjoy risk and I don't enjoy access analysis, but I love the idea of here's a bunch of territory. So my twist for all of these is to make them nomadic. You care about different areas at different times. And it's as much about abandoning as it is about like abandoning of your own volition than not. The other subtext to all these games, right? This is semi-obvious, but not until you dig into it. All three of these games have a unique way of looking at losing. I designed all three of these games for the losers, not for the winners. So like in a big multiplayer game, there's only one winner and 1 to X losers, right? So what do the losers get to accomplish that makes the game fun for them and enjoyable for them, right? Blood Rage is based on milestone, right? Rising Sun is based on incredible stories, right? Ankh is based on, I don't even know if I want to reveal this at this point, but fine. It's based lightly on engine building, right? Right. So you're right. There's a lot of slippery slope mechanics in this, or especially in the Ankh powers, right? That let you decide how you want to snowball into victory, right? But the over the table play and the way merge works, you must pay attention not only to what the other players are doing, but how they're standing, right? This is a game that demands you do not let any player fall too far behind. If you do, you might get stuck with them. Yeah. Right. So it is correct. So like I didn't want to just redo Loki, right? I want to make it go. I want players to go, oh my God, no, I think you need to get something out of this combat more than you. So the natural dynamics should force players to want everybody to stay close, right? Because if you merge, if all three players, right, if all three players are at the same level of devotion when the merge happens, amazing. You want to be number 2 and number 3, right? Then you're like, I got this, I win, right?
Yeah.
So exactly right? Cool. That's the way. And I love games that incentivize players to want to rubber band rather than have hard mechanics that make, right? That no matter what you do, you'll end up within 5 points of each other, right? Like I'm not so much into that.
Right. Gotcha.
So that's just the way I think of these games, right? And each of these games answers different questions. So I'm going to sort of repeat myself in a slightly different way. Like, what does area control mean to you, right? Philosophically, what does area control mean to you? We know what it means mechanically, but what does it mean philosophically to you? And is there something missing? And be prepared for the answer to be no. Maybe your favorite game does everything you want out of area control. Maybe there's no reason for you to make a game, right? It's a conversation I wish would happen more often in board game space, right? The answer for why do you want to make a game should usually be like, what's missing? What do you want out there, right? Like I throw 9 out of 10 of my game design ideas or even early prototypes away because I look at my shelf and go, oh yeah, that's already there. Yeah. This is Puerto Rico, but different. Yeah. I like Puerto Rico.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense.
I even throw away games that I think are like, oh, this is 5% better than, like I've made several versions of, oh, this is Splendor, but 5% better. Like, better. What does better mean? Right. Splendor exists. It does 98% of what I want it to do. I enjoy Splendor, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a good, thought process to have when you're sitting there trying to think of a game to design.
Absolutely. And sorry, let me be clear. I mean this from a commercial game designer standpoint, right? I want to never discourage people from experimenting, right? Game design is so much experimenting. So if you want to just make, like, if you want to just explore space, go for it. Absolutely, right? Like then forget everything I said, right? Like, then I actually encourage you, like, take take Puerto Rico, change 2 rules, see what happens.
Right.
Right. That's exploration. That's incredible. Do it. Go for it. Make a game. Like, make Puerto Rico plus plus. What I'm talking about is the commercial side of it, right? Mm-hmm. The commercial side of it is like it cares about hook, like what's grabbing the player, and like it's worker placement, but is not really a great hook. It sounds like it, but it's not. And why does this game deserve to exist? Right. That's right. And that's a tough question to ask. And you got to be brutal on yourself. Very often I find the answer is because I made it. That's not good enough.
Right. Well, thanks, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me today on Cardboard Creations.
Thanks, Candice. It was a pleasure. I'm enthusiastically watching your channel, and I hope you get a lot more excellent designers up there. And by the way,
Thank you.
So I want to say, because you're never going to say because you're too humble, but I was so excited that the first designer you had on this was Elizabeth Hargrave.
She's awesome.
Well, I mean, yes, she's awesome, and like I like I encourage you very strongly to as if I'm telling you stuff you don't already, but to explore diversity of designers out there, yes. Right? Like,
yes.
We do a very good job of preaching to the choir, but gosh, there's a lot of great perspectives out there that I'd love to hear more from.
Thank you. And yes, I'm definitely trying to do that. And that's why I wanted to, feature Elizabeth as my very first guest. And man, every story, every guest who's been on here so far, every designer has such a different approach, and everybody is really, I always walk away from this being so inspired. And then when I rewatch it, when we're editing and everything, I'm like, oh my goodness. But yeah, it is so awesome to have you on here. And, that was so cool to hear, especially since Ankh is so fresh in my head from just getting my copy a couple days ago and playing it twice. It's really, really cool to hear, the backstory of how you and the team created it. So thank you again for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure, Candice. I look forward to seeing more episodes.
Yeah, thank you. And then I know, outside of Ankh, it looks like there's more content coming for Marvel United. And I'll just be kind of on the lookout to see what else you're working on in the future.
I've slowed down a lot, to be honest. I've slowed down and started working a lot more. Like I said, Ankh broke me a little bit. I love the game to death. I'm not going to make another game like Ankh for a little while.
Sure.
I'm very much enjoying more family, more mass games. But don't worry. I'll come back to this. This is my DNA. I need a break.
Yeah, take your time.
I need to go explore some other types of games.
Yeah, well, we'll be ready whenever whenever you're ready to get back to it.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching Cardboard Creations. Hopefully it's been as inspiring for you as it has been for me. And remember, the only way to get something done is to start doing it.